Welcome to the podcast, Whiskey and a Map. Stories of adventure and expeditions as told by those who live them. I'm your host, Michael Reinhardt. It has been said that many adventures and expeditions start simply with a map and a glass of whiskey. A desire to go and see the world's wild places. You're invited to pull up a chair, pour yourself a glass of your favorite whiskey, and join us as we hear stories from another one of our friends just returned from the field. Welcome, everyone, to the podcast. I'd like to introduce you to a friend of mine, Michele Westmorland. Michele lives in the Pacific Northwest. Michele Westmorland is an American photographer who specializes in underwater and cultural photography. Her work has been published and can be seen in such magazines as National Geographic, Traveler, and Adventure. She's a fellow in the International League of Conservation Photographers, and actually you founded that organization, I believe. And
I was one of the participants.
Well, you're being modest. And also are a member at the prestigious Explorers Club. 2011, Michele was inducted into the Women Divers Hall of Fame. She's a world traveler, passionate conservationist. I can go on and on about the awards and things you've done, but very impressive. I'm glad that you'd join us, Michele. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate all your kind words. And yeah, it's the conservation and culture that drives me, and the marine life. There's so much, but thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
The photography, what got you started in photography?
You know, even before I learned how to scuba dive, I was always fascinated and loved photography as a hobby when I lived in Northern California. And so I had my own little dark room because that was the day of film, and really enjoyed that. I really connected with taking photos. And the sport of the day for me in Northern California was skiing. But I had to give that up when I was recruited and moved to Miami, Florida for a new corporate job. Once I got underwater, that was it. Picked up an underwater camera and I just continued on.
And then you left the corporate life and built a really nice career as a photographer. How'd that come about?
You know, I was really, when you look at it, I was extremely fortunate to be able to make a living. It was a time period when visual content had a value placed on it. So that was fortunate. I think the corporate background gave me some experience so that I knew I didn't want to read 100-page lease documents the rest of my life, but it helped me to build a business plan. So utilizing those skills, I started working on that business plan. It took me about 5 years so that I could step out of corporate life and into making a good living in photography.
Now, a couple of conversations we had before today, it seems like there's a place and there's a person that's greatly affected, I think, your life in many regards. Place is Papua New Guinea, and the person is a painter by the name of Carolyn. Is it Mertinger? Meitinger. That's how you pronounce it.
Yes.
Let's first talk about Papua New Guinea. That's for us here in the States. That's on the far side of the world. What led you to Papua New Guinea?
Well, I've been diving a lot in the Caribbean. I got a chance to go to places like Palau before I really got to kick off my career. And in the early 1990s, I was looking for a place that people were talking about but wasn't really known. And in the dive industry and at the various dive shows, the name Papua New Guinea kept coming up. So I did more research and I said, yeah, that's where I want to go. And my first trip there in the early 1990s included motorized canoeing down the Sepik River, going to Rabaul, and then spending time at Walindi Plantation Resort and on board the Fabrina. When I saw the marine life there, and just the spectacular island nation, that was it. I was hooked.
The island itself lies just north of Australia. How long does it take to get there?
Depends on what direction you fly. I tend to go through Australia. By the time I get out to the remote areas, it could be up to 36 hours, with all the flight changes or waiting and stuff. So it's a long trek, but it's well worth it.
Oh, yeah. The reefs there that first attracted you to Papua New Guinea? Yes, absolutely. And I went back several times following that to explore different territories of diving locations, such as the Gulf of Papua, even in Bootless Bay, which is the harbor right next to the capital city of Port Moresby, over to Milne Bay Province, Tufi, and every single one of those territories just, was the highest numbers of biodiversity in the marine life that I've ever known. And I developed some very strong friendships. So I continued to go back and back. Yeah. Well, let's talk about the reefs. You put on your dive gear, you got your dive mask on, you descend into the water from the surface. Describe for people as you're diving down on that reef. What do you see?
Well, they're all different. They all have their own structure and the different bommies depending on the currents and tides and what's there. But for me, jumping in the water is a place of peace. I am most comfortable at about 60 feet on average, just blowing bubbles and taking photos and observing. And it really is. It settles me down. And
many people haven't had the privilege of diving on a pristine reef. Describe that for them for what you see there.
Well, I can give an example, like right in Kimby Bay, diving on one of Susan's Reef, which is known for its red whip corals. And oh my goodness, these red whip corals just go up the side of the bommy. And even within these magical coral strands, you'll see pipefish, you see razorfish. It's unending. And then the rest of the hard coral structure is very good too. And living within that can be a variety of just intriguing animals. Some of the other bommies are known for their schooling. They don't have quite the colorful kind of soft corals, but above it could be just some incredible, magnificent schools of barracuda, jacks, batfish. And so when they're swirling all around your head, it's pretty magical.
Now, I live a little bit south of you, but which unfortunately means the diving that I have to get to do is all cold water. I've had a few times to get out on warm water reefs, but the color difference and the visibility are things that always struck me. How'd that look there?
Well, I'm not a cold water diver. I'm a wimp. I think I get teased more about that than anything, especially when you have almost 4,000 dives. And, I live here in Seattle. The Pacific Northwest has some amazing environments, with the giant octopus and just, incredible stuff. It's just not my thing. So I retreat back to the warmer water situations, along the equator and especially the Coral Triangle. Again, it provides so much biodiversity. The visibility is definitely, it's up or down like anything. Depends on the currents, depends on, what is happening. If there's a lot of rainfall and there's outflow from the islands, that can impact the visibility. But yeah, I've been to Solomon Islands, more particularly Papua New Guinea, 36 times. And it just still, there's always something new.
What's the strangest or most interesting life, fish or otherwise, that you've seen there?
Oh my goodness, you ask hard questions. I think the most exciting and something that just boggled my mind was in 1997. Was diving in Kimby Bay off one of the dive skiffs from the resort. And when we surfaced from that particular dive, I was one of the first to come up. And I got back on the skiff, and the captain and I looked out, and we saw these dorsal fins and said, what in the world is going on? So we kind of banged on the ladders, got all the rest of the divers up, and we headed out towards where we were seeing these dorsal fins. And it was mind-boggling because it was a transient pod of orcas that do happen to come into Kimby Bay once or twice a year. And they were hunting. And so I grabbed my camera, took the strobes off because I would have to snorkel. And I just set up and got in the water quickly. And the orcas took off. But what was there was about 7 female sperm whales. And the orcas were hunting the sperm whales. So I got about 4 minutes or so of just total, complete awe, bliss, my heart pumping in seeing 7 sperm whales.
Yeah, you never know when those opportunities come.
You don't. You just don't. It can surprise you. And I've only seen that experience once in my, diving career. Then there's the small stuff. I mean, there was the race to find the newest species. And one time in Milne Bay, there were 2 liveaboard dive vessels out there. I was on one, and another, actually someone who I always looked at as a mentor, is an inspiration, and that's Chris Newbert, who produced a couple very incredible books. And he used to go to Papua New Guinea quite a bit, but we were on different boats. And so we were on the look for, because one of the dive guides and captains said that they had found a hairy octopus. Now, what in the heck is that?
A hairy octopus?
A hairy octopus. And trust me, they don't get much bigger than this. They're little. So we were on the hunt for who was going to find the hairy octopus and get the first photos. I won. It was great.
So what did it look like? Does it really have hair, or?
It has a lot of filament coming out from it, so it can disguise itself in kind of leafy, shallow areas, and they are tough to find. It takes a darn good eye to spot one. And fortunately, Rob Vanderloos, the owner and captain for the Share 10, he's got a great eye for them.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now there's some not so friendly sea life there too. Coral snakes and is it the lionfish? What's that fish that has all the spines on its back?
That's the lionfish. And you kind of learn to work around lionfish. They belong in the Indo-Pacific. They have natural predators, so their numbers are kept in the right amount, whereas the introduction of lionfish into the Caribbean and off the coast of Florida, they're completely invasive species and dwindling the populations of endemic fish in the Caribbean. But in the Indo-Pacific, that's where they belong. I've had them, if I've been on a night dive, a lot of times they're smart enough, and my focusing lights that I have on my camera to look for creatures and things to photograph at night, I can turn around and there's one right by my head. He's using my lights to hunt for prey. And you just want to be a little careful on how quickly you turn around, or you don't want to swat it away because of the poisonous spines on it. They're pretty smart though. They'll utilize the lights.
Yeah, I was diving off the coast of Borneo and saw one. And you just see those spines just out there waving around, just waiting for some unsuspecting.
They hurt like a son of a gun too.
it's a bad day if you get tagged by one.
Yeah. The sharks don't bother me. If I see silver tips or reef sharks in any of the areas, they don't bother me in the least. I just take every moment and hope they keep getting closer and closer and in my frame. And they're wonderful. So you just have to know what species you're dealing with and if they're more or less aggressive. I've seen silly people reach in to a very simple, usually sleeping nurse shark, and you just don't do that. You don't reach out, you don't touch, you leave as much alone as possible.
Tell us about the people of Papua New Guinea.
Well, Papua New Guinea is, I spoke to the incredible diversity of marine life in Papua New Guinea. Culturally, New Guinea is one of the most diverse places on the planet for their culture. There's 850, this kind of dwindling now on the languages, but 850 separate languages that have been spoken in New Guinea. That's in just Papua New Guinea, which is the size of California. So imagine going from one territory to another where the clans and various tribes speak different languages. So that's, incredible, along with their, traditional practices and dress, ceremonial dress. Again, they're all unique.
When you're walking through those environments and you come upon a village, mm-hmm. What would we see? What do they look like?
Well, it depends on if you're walking along and going into villages along the coastline, which are very different than the highland territories. And if you take a look at the map, you'll see there is some really incredible geography for that island. It has a mountain that is snow-capped, right just below the equator. So it goes to 14,000 feet, which is mind-boggling. The terrain, I'm not an anthropologist, so I don't make these, I can only run them around in my brain a little bit. But if you see that kind of terrain differences, those huge mountains and the valleys and where different people set up their own tribes and communities, you can understand why that isolation may be one of the reasons why they have so many different languages.
What do their homes look like?
For the most part, they use, the natural environment. So you'll have the different types of vegetation that's used for roofs, different vegetation, and that used for the walls. Some of it's called pick. Some are on stilts, higher off the ground than in some other areas, depending on if it's coastal or Sepik River, for example, because the Sepik and the Fly River territories are both delta areas. And so those water levels can go up and down. And so a lot of those structures are put up at a higher level because of the water. So each one can have its own structure. They can be kind of a circular hut to square hut. And today you'll see a lot of villages who use tin roofs and things like that because they last longer.
Now, you took part in an expedition which was going to trace Carolyn's trip and what she did there.
Yeah.
Who is Caroline?
Caroline Meidinger. First of all, this is how I discovered her, is this book right here. It's called New Guinea Headhunt. Oops, you can't see it. This is the book that was given to me by a neighbor friend of my parents, I went to say my goodbyes to Marie. And she had this beautiful book on the shelf. She had a gorgeous little library, and she handed me this book called New Guinea Headhunt by Caroline Meidinger. And she says, I know how much you love that part of the world, and I think there's a bit of you in here. It took me a couple months to read through the book, but once I did, I just went, seriously? Caroline and a female friend, Margaret Warner, traveled to the Solomon Islands and New Guinea at the time. It was broken up through the German, the British, and the Dutch, traveled to these far off locations between 1926 and 1930. So that just, set me off. Now the books were given to me, and then I discovered that Caroline had a book that was actually published before New Guinea Headhunt, and that is called Headhunting in the Solomon Islands. So there that is. These are books that I carried on the expedition, so that's hence all the note pages. And I just couldn't let it go because I already started from my trips previously there and continuing on, became so attached and wanted to learn and know more about the people, because it wasn't all about the fish. And the fish are fabulous. It's incredible, but the people are incredible too. And the landscapes. And then when I found out about Carolyn, I decided, you know what? This is a story that needs to be told, because here was an American female artist who basically went forgotten for a variety of reasons. And so I felt a passion to tell that story and connect myself in ways that I never thought it could connect me.
And Carolyn, she went there, if I understand it correctly, she was just painting all the locals to, I guess, sort of capture and preserve what their culture was. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, that's a pretty basic thing. Back in the early 20th century, of course, there are, and as you read through, and the reasons for people going to various places to look at culture and paint them or whatever, in today would be kind of looked at differently as it was in the early 20th century. But the fact that she, when you read the books, and after I really started researching who was Caroline, what was, tried to get my arms wrapped around and my head wrapped around, what was she thinking about that? Why was she going there? What did she really want to return with? And if you watch the documentary film, you'll see the transition that she went on, and which was having one opinion. She was going to go, paint these people, and of course, terms and words back then used are not favorable today. But when she came home and really, really understood the people she was painting, their portraits, she captured them one with pride and dignity. And that's one thing that I really appreciated hearing from my Papua New Guinean friends, who've always been kind of telling me, Michelle, no, you're wrong. You need to learn this. You need to learn that. But they all came to fall in love with Caroline's paintings because of the pride and dignity. So that being said, what did she come home with? She came home with just saying, we're all just people. And I mean, it's as simple as that. We're just one and the same. So I think that's the lesson she learned while she was over there, and the lessons I continue to learn, because trust me, I know a grain of salt about the people and the culture and the history, just a grain of salt.
Well, let's go to your expedition. Mm-hmm. I call it expedition because I think of it as an expedition, but it was also the making of a documentary film that you did, that you just mentioned, the Headhunt Revisited.
With brush, canvas, and camera, which is the tagline to the documentary film. So, because it's about art, it was her play on words when she titled her books that, Headhunt Revisited. She was going to capture her heads on canvas. And of course, back in those days, headhunting was still a practice. And of course, it was reviled by the colonialists, and, many were incarcerated or that for their practices, but she just wanted to utilize that as kind of a play on words.
Let me circle back to the making of the documentary and your expedition there.
My favorite subject, Caroline, yeah.
Well, not only Caroline, but you and your crew. When you went there, because you wanted to retrace her footsteps, see the impact. And what did you learn as you went through that expedition, that experience?
There were moments of joy. There were moments of frustration. There were a lot of times my cameraman would take me to the bow of the boat and go, Michele, you need to, keep your flash off when I'm filming. There's just, you spend 2.5 months on a 72-foot liveaboard dive boat. It's going to have its challenges, but the rewards were, so incredible. And it was the Fabrina and Captain Alan Raby, who is like a big brother to me, and the owners of Walindi Plantation, Max and Cecily Benjamin, who have always been like family to me ever since the first time I went there in the early 90s. But boarding the Fabrina, that was like the little home for me. But what did we have to do prior to that? Oh my goodness. First of all, we had to properly map where Caroline traveled. So a gentleman by the name of Dickie Doyle, he was a 4th generation plantation owner. His family originated from Australia, but he was born in Rabaul. And but he knows the history. He knew the history. So at that time, I had to photocopy both books and send them over to Dickie, because he lives in a remote place called the Weetus, and so that he could study them. And it took him 8 months or more to really identify the locations where Caroline went, because even from her books, the spelling of the village names could be different. But who better to know than Dickie Doyle? I mean, that was his territory. So once we had that, we had to pick the time of year that would be best for weather purposes, filming purposes. So it was a major project to put together. Number one, I was fortunate enough to carry an Explorers Club flag, Wings World Quest flag, and a Society of Women Geographers flag on the expedition. That was pretty cool. But just boarding the Fabrina we boarded in Rabaul and then went directly over to the Solomon Islands and started working our way down through the various areas, crossed back over to one of the most remote islands in Papua New Guinea, which is called the Rossel Islands, and just working up the Louisiade Archipelago. I mean, it was mind-boggling. What were some of our challenges? Well, I like what a really respected scientist says, Edie Witter. And, she says, success in life is when you complete plan B. Anyone can do plan A. And she was absolutely right, because we had to go to plan B when we could not go to the Fly River territory as Caroline did, because we weren't going to cross the Gulf of Papua in a 72-foot boat in 15-foot seas. Just no way. It was far too dangerous. And so we had to go look at it and change some plans. But then there was the joy. Even Captain Allen had to retreat into his bridge when we first met. One of the first paintings and the descendants to one of the subjects in the paintings, and that was Morova Lagoon family. And meeting Terry and Ujaya, the sons of the young man who appears in that painting, was really quite emotional. We had no clue we would meet any descendants.
And I want to pick that up because there was also, I believe, one part where there was a gentleman who had always heard stories that his mother or grandmother had been painted, and he always wanted to know more about her and about that painting.
That was Owala Massey. And Owala is from Hanabata, which is outside the capital city of Port Moresby. And his grandmother was in one of the paintings. And when we went to see him, the culture there is not really, they don't, unless they're grieving death, they don't sob a lot. But here was Owala sitting there with tears running down his cheeks in his his little home. And he says, my grandmother told me stories of this white woman coming and painting my picture, which is, in Tokpasi, there's lots of interesting words that they use that are kind of derived from English and stuff. But he said, and I've always dreamed that someone would come tell me this story. So there we were, spending time with Owala and his family and sharing a print that I took to him as a gift of the painting. So, yeah, those are emotional. And then there was finding descendants to one of the signature paintings called Hera, the gentleman in the big headdress. His name was Ahuya. And, that was quite rewarding. But I think what's even more rewarding now is that this hasn't stopped. Yeah, we did the expedition in 2005 and couldn't get the film out until 2017 was when it was released. But it's a timeless story. And it's always, that history is always going to be important. And a year ago, I was contacted by an anthropologist in Australia from Melbourne University, and we discovered a descendant to a fifth painting. So, which is pretty cool.
Why do you think her work had such an impact on those folks in Papua New Guinea? I mean, it obviously had just they had a deep connection to these paintings that she was doing. I mean, that was passed on for generations. What was it about it, do you think, that had such an impact?
Yeah, I think Jeffrey Feger, I had to go through all different kind of changes myself. Caroline had her struggles going on her expedition, getting things ready, storms, sickness. There were a lot of things that impact her. When she came back, it was the Great Depression. Then there was World War II. So there's kind of a parallel thing that I wound up going through making the documentary. But I think Jeffrey Feger, who came into the storyline of the documentary film a little bit later in 2011 through 13, and I knew he had to be a part of it because he is Papua New Guinean and he is a contemporary portrait artist. And so who better to speak to that than someone who does that? And I think he said it best when he was referring to, we haven't seen from that time period, they only got to see a lot of black and white photos and things like that, but none in color and none with the beauty of the surroundings and the dignity and the different color tones and reflections off the skin. So there was a lot that went into it. And yeah, I rely on Jeffrey. Yeah.
It was a glimpse of them back, I suppose, to their ancestors. Because, with the changing times, a lot of cultures are just losing that history that they had. And I saw that in Guatemala, a few years ago when I was down there. I was talking to some other folks, they had seen the same thing. But yeah, just maybe it's that just, us in the U.S. and, we're used to cameras. Everybody and his brother's got a camera with a cell phone. And so we were inundated with photographs. But you go back into the bush and there are people that don't have any photographs of them or their family.
Not from the past, but I can tell you right now, I've taken a photo of a great Huli Wigman in full dress and a cell phone sticking out of his waist.
It is. The times have changed.
They really have. And you can't, there isn't a culture around that stays stagnant. Everyone changes, and then they reach back and then they change some more and reach back again. So providing, sharing this kind of information is many of the people can make their own changes. Do they use the same materials exactly that they did 100 years ago to do their ceremonial dress? Not necessarily. I've seen modern things in there or tinted feathers that are not, from the typical bush birds or birds of paradise. So we all do change. And but there's times, and a lot of the communities are reaching back to look at their culture and just pulling together and celebrating it, which is great.
Now, and I'm making an assumption here, but how did that expedition and the making of that documentary, how did it affect you?
It changed me in more ways than one. I love the ocean. The ocean is I'm all about ocean conservation. But what I was seeing, in the ocean and the problems of today and climate change and how it's impacting reefs and impacting and overfishing and all of that, what I really connected with from learning from the expedition and tying into people and humanity was that it's the people on those islands and coastlines that depend on the health of the ocean to survive. So that connection, there's no way I could separate and just be focused on marine life without caring about the human connection. That's just all there is to it.
Now, there was a photograph you shared with me that, and admittedly, I had to pry it out of you a little bit, but it's of a little girl. Tell us what does that photo depict, and how did you come about to be able to make that photograph, that image?
It's like seeing, when you get the shot or know when something feels. It's like, okay, just when I was in the water with those sperm whale, how did I feel? I was on a dive in Milne Bay province, and all of these things about the human connection had been, circling through and going through my brain because of the expedition and the documentary film project. But I was diving Milne Bay province. I surfaced from a dive. I did my safety stop, and I could see all these canoes above me. And I went, oh, that's cool. I had my big camera system. And when I surfaced, there was a mother and a child in an outrigger canoe. And it just hit me, seeing that child with the vegetables in the front of the canoe. Her mother was there. And it was like, I just knew that was it. Now, how did I get it? It was a bit challenging. It was called Inflate My BC. I asked permission of the mother if I could take the photo, and she agreed. And then I set up, the little girl at first did not have a clue of what they call long dim dim. That's a crazy white person in Tokpasi.
Coming from the denizens of the deep up.
Exactly. And so what I did is, the way the canoe was facing in that, I set my strobes, which are out on arms, up on the outrigger so I could light the child's face, and then raised my housing and my camera and took a series of photos. And of course, the ones before and after that particular shot, you can see this child going, what is this? So, but I knew when I snapped the one where she had that nice smile, that's it. And that was, we all have, as photographers, we kind of have signature shots. And that was the signature shot that represented, for me, a change in the connection between the ocean and the humanity.
Can you imagine the story that little girl is going to be telling her granddaughter or grandson about the time that this crazy creature ascended from the deeps with some contraption with arms sticking out, flashing lights?
Yeah, the kids in a variety of areas who have not experienced. There's some of the children along the piers and the wharfs, and that they're used to seeing long dim dims, with diving and scuba gear, and so they'll dive down and look at you. But this was the first time for this little girl to have that kind of experience, and for me, it was pretty darn special.
The evolution of your outlook. It evolved from the focus of like I say, just the incredible biodiversity of those reefs and the challenges to them now that connection with the people. How is that leading you now to what you're doing?
Well, what I want to do, I'm trying to do, obviously there's some things that I would like to work on a little bit more, but there's a myriad of things that that I'm working on right now that is inclusive. And it goes back to art, art that spans oceans and decades. Caroline's art did just that, right? Photographs can do that. Paintings, carvings, it doesn't matter what medium it comes in, but art is extremely important. I mean, look at our museums. I mean, they're invaluable. So, but I've yet to see contemporary expressions of art celebrated that are done by Melanesians. So that's my next project. Who knows where that will go?
No, it's funny you say that, because the preservation of the artistic history, I would think would, like all of the cultures need to be done. I mentioned I was in Guatemala. One of the projects I was doing is I became friends with one of the local villagers, and he was a teacher, and he was lamenting to me about how the culture of his people, the Mayans up there in the highlands, was disappearing so fast. Yeah. And he told me the story that just a year or two before, this old woman had died, and she was the last practitioner of last musician that played a particular Mayan musical instrument. And she was the last one. When she died, all of that music and the instrument itself disappeared. So we set up I got him some equipment to start recording. I have here my files, a recording of some traditional Mayan music by the musicians that are still there, but it's dying because younger folks aren't as interested in learning how to do or how to play, or even using those instruments. So when you say art, that the history that's encapsulated in art, needs to be preserved. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
it does. We also have to acknowledge that, again, things evolve and change. So the loss of language is a huge thing. And Dr. Joshua Bell who appears in my film from the Smithsonian, also has some project that works on languages. And there are several books that I have 2 shelves full of books on, various subject matter for Papua New Guinea and Melanesia. But I just got done reading one that was in regards to the loss of a language that was pretty remote within Papua New Guinea. So, and they're trying to collect that information so that they can preserve it in some form or fashion. But it is a huge thing to lose language, lose those sense of identity.
One last thing I want to ask you. You built a life for yourself of adventure, following your passions. What would you say to people who are sitting in that cubicle? They have their passions and they just haven't yet stepped out to follow them. I mean, you did. What would you say to them?
You have to go for it. You just have to go for it, because I can't even imagine, even with all the hardships and frustrations that I had with the documentary film, they're not easy to put together. The result, and there were times I was ready to walk away from the project. Case closed. I'm done. I'm finished. I have no more energy. But I just, for some reason, and it's probably my dad, kind of from out there, kept pushing me along. And there's just do it. Just do it. That's all I can say. just work as hard as you can and start feeling when you get one piece of research done and something raises your eyebrows, go, look at that as a success, and then maybe take the next achievement to add on to it and go, oh, I just succeeded here. And so it's taking those steps. And then finally, when you're, as Caroline said, when she held her first little book of her own in her hands, and I held the documentary film in my hands, there's nothing more rewarding. So,
how can people find out more about you and about the film and about your future projects?
Well, my main photography site is westmorlandimages.com, and that's kind of a portfolio based. It shows a lot of the variety of photography that I do. Yes, I've done a lot of commercial work. Never say no to those things. Those things taught me a lot about lighting. So you'll see a pretty wide variety in the different portfolios of my work on Westmorland Images. But the film has its own website, and it's called headhuntrevisited.org. That you can find out the motivation. You can read a little bit about Caroline. You can see there's some trailers and clips that are available. And there's always a way to reach me if you have questions, because there's nothing more that I like than talking about the project. So,
very nice. Well, Michele, thank you for sitting down and sharing these stories with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael.
All right, and look forward to seeing your work in the future.
Great. And I'll keep you posted on the artwork.
Excellent.
Okay, Michael. Thank you.
All right.
Have a good day.
Thank you for joining us. We'll see you down the road when we get together again, share a glass of whiskey, and hear more stories of adventure as told by those who live them. Until then, check us out at michaeljreinhardt.com, where you'll find more of my work as an adventure photojournalist. Photos, videos, and articles of interesting people, mysterious places, and exotic cultures from the wild places of the world.